Welcome back. I hope everyone had a great spring break, and I wanted to just make a couple of comments about the midterm, a few questions that people weren't consistent on their responses to, and I want to make sure that everyone's understanding them because we'll return to this information during our during our final, but also just that it's important information to have for your own professional endeavors. One is when the question about when children go through a process of 18 to 24 months when they rapidly learn new words. This phenomenon is called the vocabulary spurt, and we talked in class and in your notes and in the book about the fact that not all children go through it. Some children are slow and steady right from the get-go, but that I think it's about 60% of children go through the vocabulary spurt. So that's the name of that phenomenon. The question about a child who says boo-boo to refer to his grandmother, this tripped people up, and it wasn't intentionally meant to trip you up, but because the child is pairing a phonological representation, boo-boo, specifically to his grandmother, right there we know that there's intentionality in what is being produced, and so it can't be reduplicated babbling. Reduplicated babbling is something that emerges around 6 months of age, and it's purposeful, non-intentional. And so what we would call boo-boo referring to grandmother would be a proto-word or phonetically consistent form. So just wanted to make sure people understand when we're talking about babbling, it cannot have intentionality associated with it. The question about a child making a request to his mom, but it isn't successful. She's in the other room and she didn't hear it. I accepted a number of different comments or answers to this one. A communication breakdown, a pragmatic breakdown, lack of presuppositional knowledge, failure to communicate successfully, anything in this family of responses, because what we're talking about here is that the child has made an effort to communicate, but because of the situation not being aware that his mother isn't able to respond to him, it's not a successful communicative pursuit. Turn-taking skills are first acquired, we know, really close to birth, and so the research suggests that it's through early feeding routines. We did talk about this in our in-class conversations, but it's also in your notes. So that typically we think about early breastfeeding where a baby is feeding and then stopping and mom is interacting with the baby during those times, that those are the early behaviors and routines that set the groundwork, the foundation for what later turns into more well-developed turn-taking skills. A strategy that children use to simplify the phonemic patterns of adult syllables and words. Really what I'm talking about here is just phonological processes, and so that's key in that sentence was that idea of phonemic patterns, and so many people got it right. Some people gave a specific example of a phonological process, and that was accepted as well. Either one of those was fine. The coordination of attention a child establishes between an item and the environment and a person is called joint attention, and that's a really key developmental acquisition for children. We talked in class about the fact that this is sort of the hallmark of children who are not developing typically, say, in some neurodevelopmental issues such as autism, that joint attention does not develop, is not established. So it's a really important term for you to know, understand, what that is. The question that asked about communication when a child is making eye contact, waiting for a response, persistent in his efforts, is all about intentional communication. So any comment in that category that talked about intentionality was accepted, and we went over that a number of times in class and certainly is highlighted a number of times in your notes and in your text, but it's a really important to be clear about what intentional communication is, and that's really the hallmark definition that I shared with you in this question. And then the question that asked about humans being predisposed to learn language, a number of your TED Talks really go into all kinds of factors and behaviors that shows children really coming to the table with this real inherent sociability, we'd call it, like this real need and want to communicate. And so some of those behaviors are the fact that they have preference for human faces over other objects, or they have preference for human voice over other voices, and particularly a connection to their mother's voice. We know that they have early imitation skills, early turn-taking kinds of skills that happen very early on, and all of those are those early behaviors that would suggest that they are really predisposed to learn language. Some people threw in maybe just one item, like they have imitation skills, and I gave partial credit whenever I was able to do so. But those are some of the behaviors that I was looking for in that answer. Motherese, people for the most part got this question absolutely correct, although once in a while someone answered with something like motherese is baby talk. Well, that doesn't really define what motherese is, and so the example there should have included some information about its exaggerated stress, it's a higher pitch, it's slower pace, all of those kinds of things that define what baby talk actually is. And I just took off a little bit of credit if people said it is critical, because it's not a critical component of language. It's helpful. We know that children pay attention to motherese more. We know that because oftentimes when parents are producing motherese, they're producing nouns like on the end of words, like it's an apple. Oh, look at that apple. What a nice red apple. They're giving lots of exposure and experience and good stress on that word that would help a baby or a toddler learn the meaning of the word, associating the word with a phonological referent. But we know that there are lots of cultures that don't use motherese or baby talk at all, and we know that in those cultures language still comes in similar stages in similar ways, so it's not a critical component of language development. Characteristics of first words, they are produced at 12 months or a year is what's most typical. We know that there's often more nouns than verbs, and we know that there's a relationship to the sounds that the child has produced in babbling. Many of you also identified they're likely to include words like dog and cat, which is not a correct answer because typical first words are one or two syllables. So it might be da or dada or ka, or other CV or CVCV, but not CVC productions. But that was something that really the majority of people miss. So just wanted to make that point that when we see kids' first words being produced, rarely are they CVC combinations. But I just threw that out and gave everybody complete credit in that area if you had selected that. Message that we're trying to communicate with words or gestures is intentional communication, communicative intent, pragmatic intent. Just wanted to clarify that question. And most people got this one correct as well, but just to sort of expand upon it, it is really critical that caregivers interpret reflexive cries as being intentional. It's not an issue for them down the road, because when you think about a parent really associating different cries with different kinds of needs for an infant, or even things as babies are doing like reduplicated babbling, like Baba later on down the road, or Mama, even though that may well not be associated with the word Mama, caregivers are making those connections. And so all the time we're assigning intentionality to babies' behaviors and infants and toddlers, even when it's not truly intentional. And so that's an important way that children are learning intentional communication, because we're assigning that intent all the time. And babies start to imitate right from the start. Some research shows that early imitation can occur within a few hours of birth. Crazy that they have researchers that have been able to look at that quickly after a baby has been born, but that research has been done. But it's a really, really early developing skill. Some very early imitation skills happen. Some say within those first few hours of birth, but certainly early on. Overall, people did great on the midterm. The average grade was an 85%. It ranged from 53 to 100% in terms of performance. 19 A's, 21 B's, 7 C's, and then 5 people below a C. So you are welcome to reach out and talk to Elise or I related to your performance on the midterm, especially if you're performed less than you had hoped to, and just in terms of your strategies for approaching the midterm, what you did, and it can maybe help you to be a little bit more successful on the final, which will be a similar format. Okay, again, any questions, definitely let us know. Thanks.